I know one of the things that you've been really passionate about over the last 6 months is, quote unquote, securing the critical infrastructure. Um, Tell
Yeah,
us a little bit about the work there and why that's so important.
yeah, I think it is really important. So I've mentioned that there's been a big shift. So back, 15 years ago when I was at Canonical, it was really hard work because we were trying to get open source into businesses, into organizations, into the public sector. And, we were campaigning and I would use the term industry, but it wasn't an industry. The open communities were encouraging people to use open source software. And now everybody's using it. And it's happened at a rate of knots, and the level of and the scale of adoption is incredible. But it's happened over a 10-year period, and it's often happened without a lot of planning or a lot of understanding. And I've already alluded to the fact that a lot of that's come from digitalization, more engineers, and lots of companies that didn't have them before. And there's a lot of either misunderstanding or complete lack of understanding of what you're taking on. So when you take proprietary code into an organization, you'll sign up to a license. It won't be a standardized license. It'll be a proprietary one. It'll be negotiated. It'll go through legal. It'll go through procurement. There'll be a finance decision about it. You manage your risk at that point. When you've got open source, it will largely come in on a standard license. In an ideal world, your organization will have a policy decision made about it and a policy about what licenses it accepts and how that works. But there will also be a risk involved. And that risk is about how you implement and what you do, what the technical practices, the good technical hygiene is, what the governance is, and how you implement it. And one thing that the open source licenses have in common is they disclaim liability. So they say the developer is not liable. You use this at your own risk. Now, you could argue that most proprietary software isn't that different because of all the disclaimers and the exclusions of proprietary licensing. But let's focus on the standards. Let's focus on open source. And we know that when people take it on, they take it at their own risk. So they're responsible for where they use it. And they often haven't thought that through because it comes into their organization, it gets used, they become dependent on it, and it's only at the stage that they want to go and buy services that they actually start to assess it. But often they've tried to fit it like a square peg in a round hole. So that they've done what they've always done with proprietary without understanding that they have to do a bit more. You, the user, has to understand what it is that you're taking on. So we have this situation where there's massive adoption across the enterprise, and enterprise infrastructure is now built on open source, and the same's happened in our public sector, and we see not just our national infrastructure, but our national critical infrastructure sitting on top of open source code, but code that hasn't always been implemented well. And I think what we've seen over the last 18 months, 2 years, is governments start to focus primarily on security, which I don't think is the right way to do it. I think actually they should be broader. I mean, I'm pleased that they're focusing on security because it's important, but I think the focus should be broader and it should be on this curation concept, all the things that you have to do open source well in your organization, to bring it in, to manage it, to manage its future. But there also has to be a level of contribution back. Over the years, we've heard a lot about paying maintainers. And I think if you just think about the balance between individuals creating stuff that was, they free released it for everybody to use, but then they have users who now are going to put pressure on them because they need to be sure that it's maintained well because it's going to be used in, I don't know, a nuclear arsenal or whatever it is. That's a little bit extreme, but it could
But
be.
it happens. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Or it could be Boeing were really interesting. So Avi and I were at Linux Members Summit, and Boeing did one of the keynotes, and they talked about how that they're not just a security focused organization. Safety is massive, and they've had issues that we all know about in the past. Yet they've just allowed their engineers to start contributing back to open source because they know they have to do that. You go on your maturation journey. You start as a user, you become a contributor, and you become a distributor. So that contribution helps them to shape the software in the future, to ask for features to be included and that kind of thing. But you've got that big picture where people are using the scale of open source that they are, but particular things. So we saw Log4j last year, and I think it was 8 million platforms, 8 million users, were impacted by the Log4j, Shell4j vulnerability. Now,
I
that's
think it's a lot more than that too. Yeah.
well, that's what we've been told. And
Right.
the last thing I'm going to say on it is the interesting bit to me is that the security guys who I've been hanging out a lot more with over the last year, they're saying that it's the people who don't know they've got it because they think they've got a proprietary product, but actually they've got open source hidden away in it. So we talk about security, we talk about the good work that's been done in the US that the EU are now replicating, and you see there a focus on supply chain and software bill of materials. But that needs to be done in proprietary as well. I mean, that's about all software. Security is a software issue, not an open source issue. And for open source, our picture is slightly different. And I think it's about risk and managing risk by understanding what you're using and how you're using it and how to do it well.